Imagine a website so strange and so free that it scared the most powerful company in the world. And then, one day, Disney bought it. Why? That's what we're going to uncover tonight. Chapter 1: A digital frontier nobody controlled. When people talk about the internet today, they think of big platforms. Everything feels polished and controlled. But in the 1990s, it was nothing like that. Back then, the internet felt like a wild frontier. There were no rules, no big companies watching every post. It was strange, messy, and exciting. It was also a little dangerous. This chapter takes us back to that time. It is important to picture what the internet really was before it became what we know today. There were only a few million people online. They used slow dial-up modems. Every sound of that modem, that long beeping and buzzing, was a doorway into a new world. It was slow, but once you got online, you found yourself in a place full of secrets. There were small forums, message boards, and personal websites everywhere. Most of them were run by regular people from their bedrooms. It felt like stepping into a neighborhood of strange houses, each one built by hand, each one unique. One of those houses was different. It stood out. It was called paranoia.com. It was not a business. It did not belong to any company. It was created by one person who wanted to build something open, something free. It was a place where people could say whatever they wanted, and that is what made it powerful and a little dangerous. To understand why paranoia.com mattered, you need to imagine how small the internet was. Big social media did not exist. Google did not exist. There was no YouTube, no Facebook, no Chiki. If you wanted to say something online, you had to make your own site or find someone willing to host your words. Many people were looking for a place where they could speak freely. There were already forums, but most of them had rules. They had moderators who would remove posts. For people who wanted a space with no limits, paranoia.com was the answer. It started with one man named Kevin, known online as Kevin's. 1995, he decided to use his own money and create a server. He opened it to anyone who wanted to publish something. He did not charge them. He did not tell them what to write. If you had something to say, you could upload it. It could be a simple page about your ideas. It could be a long post about a theory. It could be a piece of art or writing. He called this site paranoia.com. He thought the name was fitting because the world was full of hidden truths and people who felt ignored, and the name stuck. People came. At first there were only a few, but word spread. By 1996, hundreds of users were uploading pages. These pages were not like the websites you see today. There was no fancy design. There were only words, simple images, and sometimes strange sound files. But what mattered was the freedom. People wrote about things that were hard to find anywhere else. They talked about UFO sightings. They talked about strange experiments. They shared personal stories of seeing things that others said were impossible. It was raw and unfiltered. This freedom made paranoia.com famous. It also made it a target. Some people loved it, others hated it. Some thought it was a dangerous place where lies could spread. Others believed it was a safe place where truth could finally come out. For many, it was the first time they saw an online space where no one was in control. If you think about the word paranoia, you think of fear. You think of someone who is always looking over their shoulder. And in a way, that was the mood of the early internet. Many people believed that powerful organizations were watching. They believed that secrets were hidden everywhere. Paranoia.com gave them a place to talk about it. But the site was not just for conspiracy theories. It also hosted pages about art, science, and strange philosophy. People could write about anything that made it unpredictable. You never knew what you would find on the next page. Sometimes it was interesting, sometimes it was scary, but it was never boring. What is important to remember is how small the world felt back then. If you found a strange page, you could email the person who wrote it. You could talk to them directly. There was a sense of connection that does not exist on the big internet now. Paranoia.com built a small community of people who were curious. Some were serious researchers. Others were just looking for a place to belong. The 1990s were also a time when many people started to distrust big institutions. News stories about government secrets were everywhere. Movies like The X-Files were popular. The idea that something was hidden, that there were mysteries waiting to be solved, was on everyone's mind. Paranoia.com fit perfectly into that culture. It became a home for those questions, and yet, it stayed small. It was not about making money. There were no ads. There were no algorithms. It was a single person, running a server in his own way. This is what made it pure. It was a digital notebook for hundreds of people. Looking back now, Paranoia.com feels almost impossible. Today, if a website like that appeared, it would be swallowed by bigger platforms. It would be controlled, changed, and filled with ads. But back then, it was real. It was independent. This was a golden age for people who loved mysteries. Every day you could log on and find something new. Some of it was nonsense. Some of it was brilliant, and all of it was free. In a way, this chapter is not just about one website. It is about a moment in time, a time when the internet was a blank page, a time when people thought they could create anything. There was hope, there was excitement, and there was a feeling that, just maybe, the truth could be found in these new digital spaces. But like all frontiers, this freedom came with a cost. It was not going to last forever. The more people came, the more attention the site drew. And attention was not always good. The next chapters will explore what happened as Paranoia.com became larger and started to attract the kind of interest that would eventually lead to its end. For now, think about the power of one person creating something that allowed so many voices to be heard. This is where the story of Paranoia.com begins. A place with no rules, a place for everyone. A place that no one could imagine would one day be linked to one of the biggest companies on earth, Disney. Chapter 2. The Rise of Paranoia.com. The story of Paranoia.com really begins with one person. His name online was Kevin. He was not rich. He was not famous. He was just a man who loved the new world of the internet. In 1995, he made a decision that would change everything for him and for hundreds of strangers. He set up a server in his own space and gave it a name, Paranoia.com. This site started very small. It was just one computer, running day and night. Kevin paid for it himself. There were no ads, no sponsors, no fees. He didn't build it to earn money. He built it because he believed in something. His belief was simple. Everyone should have a place to speak. Everyone should have a place to share ideas, even the strange ones. At that time, very few people understood what a website could be. Most websites belonged to schools, companies, or big organizations. They had rules. They had limits. Kevin wanted to do something different. He wanted Paranoia.com to be a place where people could write about anything. And that is what made it special. The early pages on Paranoia.com were simple. They were made by hand, with basic HTML. There was nothing fancy about them. Most had a white background and black text. But they were full of energy. They were personal. Each page was like a window into someone's thoughts. People wrote about everything. Some wrote about science. Some wrote about politics. Many wrote about strange experiences. One page could be about a UFO sighting. Another page might be about a hidden military base. Another page might be a poem. It was unpredictable, and that was why people loved it. The site grew fast. By the end of the first year, there were hundreds of small pages. Kevin opened the door wider. He gave accounts to anyone who asked. It didn't matter if they were professional writers or just curious teenagers. If you wanted to speak, he gave you space. Soon, Paranoia.com became known as a home for the odd corners of the internet. People who felt like outsiders came there. People who thought nobody listened to them found an audience. And as the number of voices grew, so did the attention. At first, that attention was good. Other websites linked to Paranoia.com. Early search engines like AltaVista and Lycos listed it as a unique source. People looking for weird hidden stories were told to check it out. If you were looking for things that big media didn't cover, you went there. The mood of the internet in the late 1990s made Paranoia.com even more powerful. This was a time when popular TV shows like The X-Files made people ask questions about what was real and what was hidden. Movies about hackers and secret files were everywhere. The Cold War had just ended, but there was still a lot of fear and curiosity. Paranoia.com became a place where people could put those questions into words. But Kevin had rules of his own, even though they were few. He made it clear that the site was a place for free speech, but it was not for hate, it was not for cruelty. He wanted people to be bold, but he also wanted them to be thoughtful. His biggest rule was this: respect the server. This was not a giant company, it was one man paying for everything. If people abused it, the site could not survive. This balance between freedom and respect worked for a long time. New voices came in, old voices stayed. Many people learned how to build websites for the first time through paranoia.com. Some of them would go on to careers in technology. Others just loved having a place to share. One thing that set paranoia.com apart was the trust. Kevin didn't ask people for their real names. He didn't ask for money. He just gave them a home. It felt like a gift, and people treated it that way. For many users, logging on to paranoia.com became a daily habit. You never knew what you were going to find. One day, it might be a detailed report on strange lights in the sky. Another day, it might be someone's theory about how a famous company was hiding something. And every day, it was growing. By the late 1990s, paranoia.com was known around the world. It was small compared to big sites today, but in its time, it was a major hub for the underground side of the web. Some people called it dangerous, others called it brilliant, but everyone agreed that it was different. This was also when Kevin started to notice something else. The community was changing. It was no longer just a few curious people. It was now a mix of researchers, artists, conspiracy writers, and regular people who wanted to watch. The site became a kind of stage, and when that happens, things start to get more complicated. With more visitors came more strain on the server. Kevin was paying for everything, and the costs went up. Bandwidth, the amount of data that moved in and out of the server, became a problem. The site was getting too big for one person to handle. Even so, Kevin held on to his vision. He still wanted paranoia.com to be open. He still wanted it to be free, and in a way that made it even more attractive. People could feel that it was not about business, it was about the idea. This chapter of the story is about growth. It's about how one small idea turned into something that touched many people. It's about how a simple server became a symbol of what the internet could be before companies took over. And yet, growth also meant new problems. Attention is a double-edged sword. The more eyes that looked at paranoia.com, the more pressure built up around it. People began to wonder how long it could last. As the 1990s moved toward the year 2000, the world was changing fast. The internet was no longer a quiet place. Big companies were moving in. Money was everywhere, and a small, personal site like paranoia.com was starting to feel fragile. For the users, it was still a safe place, but behind the scenes, Kevin could see the weight of it all. This was the beginning of a turning point. In the next chapter, we'll look at the moment when that weight started to show, when the open door of paranoia.com began to feel the push of forces much bigger than one man and his server. Chapter 3, Trouble on the Horizon. By the time paranoia.com became well known, the internet itself had started to change. It was no longer just a playground for curious people. Companies were moving in. There was money to be made. The web was growing fast, and small independent sites began to feel the pressure. For a site like paranoia.com, this was a dangerous time. It had no business model. It had no investors. It survived only because one person, Kevin, believed it should exist. But with more users came more problems. The first problem was technical. The server that hosted the site had a limit. Every picture, every file, every page that people visited used a small piece of bandwidth. When the site was small, that was fine. But by the late 1990s, hundreds of people visited the site every day. Each visit took up more and more of Kevin's resources. One day, he posted a message to the community. It was simple, but serious. He asked people to be careful. He told them to keep their pages small, to avoid huge images or heavy files. He explained that the server could not handle too much. He also told them something important. He was paying for all of it himself. There was no company behind him. No one was helping. Many users listened. They tried to be careful, but the internet was growing faster than anyone expected. Even with careful use, The server was close to breaking. The second problem was attention. As paranoia.com grew, it began to attract people outside of its small circle. Journalists found it. Bloggers wrote about it. Search engines put it near the top for words like conspiracy, UFO, or secrets. New visitors came in every day. Not all of them were friendly. Some visitors came just to laugh. Others came to cause trouble. But some came with a much more serious interest. These were people who seemed to watch quietly, without saying much. They downloaded files. They copied pages. They never posted anything themselves. And after they visited, some pages disappeared. This made the community nervous. Users started to whisper to each other. Who are these silent visitors? Why do they take things and never speak? Are they just curious, or are they something else? This was a time when many people already believed that certain parts of the internet were being monitored by governments or corporations, and paranoia.com, with its open library of strange and sensitive topics, seemed like the perfect place to watch. Over time, the tone of the site began to change. There was still curiosity, there was still excitement, but there was also a feeling of being watched. Some users wrote about this directly. They said they had noticed new email addresses following them. They said they saw unusual activity on their pages. It is hard to know how much of this was real and how much was paranoia. But in a place called paranoia.com, the line between those two things was always thin. Kevin tried to keep things calm. He reminded everyone that the site was about free speech. He told them not to let fear take over. But he also admitted that the attention was growing, and with attention came pressure. For Kevin, running the site became a daily task. He fixed pages, he managed accounts, he dealt with messages from angry outsiders, and all of this while he had his own life, his own work. Paranoia.com was supposed to be a passion project. Now it was becoming something heavier. In the background, costs kept rising. Hosting a large site in the 1990s was not cheap. Every new visitor meant more data. Every new page meant more space. And because he refused to put ads on the site, there was no money coming in to cover it. It became clear that something had to change. Kevin started talking about limits. He told users that the site might need to slow down. He even said that, if things kept going like this, it might have to close. That warning shocked the community. For many people, paranoia.com had become a daily habit. It was their place to speak. It was their place to read things they could not find anywhere else. The idea that it could vanish made them anxious. Still, the warnings were not enough to stop the growth. By the end of the 1990s, the site was busier than ever. More pages, more files, more theories, and more silent visitors. Some users began to back up their own pages. They downloaded entire sections of the site, just in case. They were afraid that one day, they would wake up and it would all be gone. At the same time, rumors began to spread. People said the site was being watched. Some even said the site was being targeted. Stories about hidden pressure started to appear in emails. They want this site gone. One message read, "Was that true? It is hard to say." But when people feel like something rare and free is in danger, they start to see signs everywhere. The year 2000 came, and with it came a bigger internet. Faster connections, bigger companies, bigger servers, and yet, paranoia.com stayed small. It was almost like an island, holding on against a rising tide. Kevin kept working, the users kept posting, but behind every page was the same question: how long can this last? In the next chapter, we will see what happened when that question was finally answered. When, after years of running on passion and stubbornness, paranoia.com disappeared. And when, out of nowhere, one of the biggest names in the world, Disney, stepped into the story. The strange part is that no one saw it coming. Chapter 4. The vanishing and the purchase in the early 2000s. Something strange started to happen to paranoia.com. At first it was small. A page here and there would not load. Sometimes the server was slow. Sometimes it went offline for a few hours. The regular users noticed right away. They were used to this site being there whenever they wanted it. So when it started to flicker like an old light bulb, they worried. Kevin tried to fix it. He posted small updates telling everyone that the site was under stress. He explained that the server was tired. He told people he was doing everything he could to keep it alive. But the truth was, the internet around paranoia.com had become a very different place. The small personal servers that once worked fine could no longer keep up with the new level of traffic. Bigger websites had big budgets. Kevin had himself. Weeks turned into months. There were more crashes. Sometimes the server was down for an entire day. The community stayed patient. They shared files with each other and saved copies of the pages they loved. They told Kevin to take his time. They believed that if they waited, paranoia.com would come back like it always did. But one day, it didn't. The site went offline and did not return. Days passed, then weeks. There was no update from Kevin. People started to send emails, but there was no reply. For a while, all they could do was refresh their browser and hope. It felt like a library had burned down overnight. All those voices, all those ideas, gone. Then, out of nowhere, there was news that no one expected. Someone discovered that the domain name paranoia.com was no longer owned by Kevin. It had been purchased, and the new owner was one of the biggest companies on Earth. The new owner was Disney. The reaction from the old community was immediate. They were shocked. Why would Disney, a company known for family movies, theme parks, and cartoons, buy a website like paranoia.com? It made no sense. Disney was the opposite of what paranoia.com stood for. Paranoia.com was raw, strange, and completely free. Disney was polished, controlled, and careful about its image. People started asking questions. Was this a mistake? Was it really the same domain? It was records of domain registration clearly showed that Disney had taken ownership. They now controlled the name that once belonged to a small free speech site. At first, there was hope that maybe Disney bought it as part of a bigger internet plan. Maybe they wanted to archive the content. Maybe they were going to turn it into a documentary about the early internet. But nothing like that happened. Disney just held on to the name. The site itself stayed offline. The content was gone. This silence only made people talk more. It didn't take long for theories to form. Some people believed that Disney wanted to protect its image. They thought the company bought the site so that no one else could use it to post dangerous or false information. Others thought Disney had bought the name because of something specific that had been posted there. Maybe a page that mentioned the company in a way they didn't like. And there were people who believed something even bigger, that Disney was part of a group that wanted to shut down places like paranoia.com forever. There was no proof. There were no official statements. There was just a fact. The site that once stood for absolute freedom now belonged to a huge corporation. For the users who loved paranoia.com, this was the worst ending they could imagine. Not only was the site gone, but its name had been taken by one of the most powerful brands in the world. It felt like a symbol that the wild free internet of the 1990s was over. Many users saved what they could. They traded old copies of pages on CDs and USB drives. A few managed to upload some of the old content to small personal sites, but the original was gone. Without Kevin, there was no way to rebuild it. And Kevin himself seemed to disappear from the public eye. He stopped posting messages. He stopped answering emails. No one knew if he had sold the name himself, or if it had been taken when the domain expired. The timing of Disney's move was interesting. This was around the same period when companies began buying up hundreds of domain names, just to make sure no one else could use them. Some people think Disney bought it as part of a simple defensive strategy. To them, it was just a business move. But others are not so sure. What we know for certain is that after Disney bought the domain, it never returned to what it was. The pages of paranoia.com were gone forever, and with them, an entire piece of early internet history disappeared. This was not just the end of a website, it was the end of a kind of freedom. It showed that the open, personal internet of the 1990s was not going to last forever. Big companies were here now, and they had the money to take control of whatever they wanted. People still talk about the day paranoia.com went dark. They talk about how strange it felt to see the name of a free speech site linked to one of the largest corporations in the world. For some, it confirmed their deepest fears. For others, it was just a reminder that nothing online lasts forever. In the next chapter, we will explore the theories. Why would Disney buy a site like this? What did they gain from it? And why, after all these years, does the story of paranoia.com still haunt the corners of the internet? Because even now, decades later, no one has a clear answer. Chapter 5, Theories and Secrets. When Disney bought the domain paranoia.com, there was no press release, no explanation, no sign of what they planned to do with it. And because there was no explanation, people began to create their own. The empty space left by the site became a home for theories. The first theory was the most simple. Some believed this was only a business move. During that time, big companies were buying hundreds of domain names to protect their image. They did not want someone else using their name or creating a site that could harm them. Disney, being one of the biggest brands in the world, had more reason than most to do this. According to this theory, paranoia.com was nothing more than a name that Disney wanted to keep locked away. They would never use it. They would just hold it. This explanation made sense to some, but it didn't explain why a family brand would care about a name linked to conspiracy culture, unless there was a reason. The second theory is more creative. It says Disney wanted the ideas. Paranoia.com had thousands of strange pages full of wild concepts, story ideas, and mysterious content. Some believe Disney bought the domain because they saw potential in that world of imagination. They wanted to make sure that no one else could use those ideas for books, movies, or TV. In this version, Disney was not just buying a name. They were buying a treasure chest of ideas. The third theory is the one that has never gone away. It says Disney wanted to erase something, that somewhere inside the pages of paranoia.com was a piece of information they didn't want the public to see. Maybe it was a theory that came too close to the truth. Maybe it was a file that someone uploaded without knowing its value. Whatever it was, this theory claims that the best way to make it vanish was to take control of the site itself. This last theory has fueled thousands of discussions. People talk about how Disney, with all its resources, could quietly make a site disappear without anyone noticing. They talk about how strange it is that the site was left to die before the purchase, almost like someone was waiting for the right moment. They also point out that after the purchase, Disney never explained why they wanted it. Internet archivists have tried to recover as much of paranoia.com as they can. They have used the Wayback Machine and other tools to capture pages that still exist on old servers. Many of these pages are still out there, but a lot of the site is gone forever. And what remains does not show anything obviously dangerous. It only shows that the site was full of controversial topics. But it's hard to know what might have been deleted or hidden long before the purchase. Those who study internet history say the timing of everything feels like part of a larger pattern. In the early 2000s, the internet shifted. Small, independent sites started to disappear. Some were bought, some just faded away. In their place came large, controlled platforms, places where free speech was limited by rules and algorithms. Paranoia.com was not the only site to vanish, but its story stands out because of how open and raw it once was, and because of who ended up owning it. For people who spent years on paranoia.com, the purchase was personal. It felt like a message. The wild days of the internet were over. A new era had begun, one where even the strangest corners could be taken away. Even now, researchers and fans still debate why Disney bought the domain. Every few years, the question comes up again. It appears on Reddit, in podcasts, in YouTube videos. Someone always asks, does anyone know why Disney owns paranoia.com? And the answer is always the same. No one knows for sure. It is this lack of a clear answer that keeps the mystery alive. If Disney had made a statement, if they had said, we bought this for business reasons, maybe the story would have ended there. But silence is powerful. And in a world where people already feel that powerful companies hide the truth, silence is almost as good as proof. Theories have grown with time. Some people now link the purchase to bigger stories about control of information. They think that the early internet was like a wild forest, and that big companies have spent the last 2 decades cutting it down, one site at a time. The goal, in this view, is to make sure that nothing is left that they cannot control. Of course, not everyone agrees with that. Some people think it is just a coincidence. They believed Disney's lawyers probably had a list of names to buy, and Paranoia.com just happened to be one of them. To these people, the mystery is not that deep, it's just business. But even those people admit that the timing and the silence are strange. What is true is that the purchase changed how people looked at the site's history. When Paranoia.com was alive, it was just a place for voices. After the purchase, it became a symbol of something that was once open and free, now locked away. A reminder that the internet can take away as fast as it gives. In the next chapter, we will step back and look at what all of this means. We will look at what Paranoia.com left behind, what its story says about the internet we live with today, and why, even now, decades later, people still wonder what Disney saw in that strange little site. Chapter 6, Legacy and the Strange Power of a Name. The story of Paranoia.com is not just about a website. It is about a moment in time that is now gone. It was a time when the internet was open, when people believed they could speak without being watched, when a single person could build a place that mattered. Today, when we look back, it feels almost impossible that something like that could exist. The legacy of Paranoia.com lives in memory and in pieces. A few old pages still survive on archive sites. They are like broken windows into a building that no longer stands. If you look through them, you can see what made the site special. You can see the voices of regular people trying to make sense of a strange world. You can feel their curiosity. That feeling is important because it reminds us what the internet once was. It was small, yes, but it was also human. People made things because they wanted to share. They were not chasing likes. They were not fighting an algorithm. They just wanted to connect. That is what Paranoia.com gave them. The disappearance of the site and the Disney purchase became a turning point. For many, it was the moment they realized that the internet was no longer free. If a small site like this could vanish overnight, then anything could. If a powerful company could take control of its name, then nothing was safe. And yet, something of Paranoia.com has survived. The people who were part of it have carried that spirit into new spaces. Some of them create podcasts. Some write blogs. Some run small forums that try to capture the same feeling. The names are different, but the idea is the same. To keep a space alive where people can speak without fear. When you think about the strange path this story has taken, you have to ask, was Disney just cleaning up an old domain? Or did they want to keep something hidden? Maybe we will never know. Maybe the answer is simple. Maybe the answer is buried in a box of old server files that no one will ever open. What we do know is that the name Paranoia.com still has power. Even now, when people hear it, they remember the mystery. They remember the feeling of finding something unexpected on a late night in front of an old computer screen. In a way, Paranoia.com was a warning. It showed that the internet can give you everything and then take it away. It also showed that big companies, with all their money, can decide what stays and what goes. And it made people realize that if you care about a space, you have to protect it before it's gone. Today, when you type Paranoia.com into your browser, you will not find the world that Kevin built. It is just an empty name now, a name that once held hundreds of voices, a name that once felt alive. And that is why its story still matters. At the end of this journey, we are left with one final question. Did Disney buy a piece of early internet history, or did they buy silence? That is for you to decide. If this story made you think about the way the internet has changed, let me know in the comments. Tell me what sites you remember from the early days. And if you enjoy exploring mysteries like this one, consider liking this video and subscribing. We have many more digital mysteries to uncover together.